Good evening. I'm Bill Deeds, the Conservative Member of Parliament for Ashford in Kent.
It's 40 years on since Bill Deeds had the task of selling the Tories to the public. He was the star of the party's early propaganda efforts on TV and in the cinema.
To make life more worth living for us all, we must never give up trying to make things better still. That is the spirit which inspires the Conservative Party.
Spirit which inspires the Conservative Party. Crikey. Well, it's a double shock, really, because A, I have to break to you, I have a rule, which is never to listen to myself and never look at myself on television. Now, that's the first time I've actually seen anything as awful as that. The second thing, I can't think why anybody would vote for somebody who talks like that. I'm more horrified. I must have been much luckier than I thought.
What Bill Deeds calls his luck has made him the only man alive who's been both a cabinet minister and a Fleet Street editor. He's also been the inspiration for two of the enduring figures of English comic literature. At the age of 80, he still goes to work every day at the Daily Telegraph in Canary Wharf. He edited the paper for 11 years and now works for his successor, Max Hastings.
I think Bill tremendously enjoys still being a player in the game, and heaven knows he's still a very influential player in the game in many ways. That, for example, his publicly expressed views on how the government's doing and how the Conservative Party is doing still carry tremendous weight.
Every now and again, I can pretty well guess what's going to happen, having been familiar with the machinery of Whitehall and exactly how everything works from both junior minister and cabinet minister's point of view. It enables you very often to anticipate what's going to happen, because you know the kind of hoop, you know the kind of circuit that the whole thing is going to go on. And it is valuable to know how things work from the other side.
Although Bill Deeds achieved high office on both sides of the Whitehall fence and has won many decorations, he claims that something completely different transformed his public standing. He's the eponymous Dear Bill of the Dennis Thatcher letters in Private Eye.
That's a good intro.
Excellent. Very good. Off we go. Dear Bill.
I've got to go to Lillywhite.
Some new They've got some new Japanese luminous boards. Your balls light up when you go around in the dark.
Yes.
Where's your ball? Did I get in here?
No. It's over there.
I thought. What? Well, you think this is where I came?
No, I think it was over there.
No, I wasn't looking.
There it is. It's on the
there
middle
it
of the
is.
fairway.
Oh, well, that's all right. What's wrong with that?
I said it was very good. Sounded good.
No, I don't think it is.
It's a bit off the line, but
Well,
all right.
Dennis Thatcher and Bill Deeds have been golfing partners for 40 years.
I really feel rather savage about cutting the turf here, don't I? It's almost sort of... It's like digging up somebody's garden.
It'll do.
You've done what was required of it. The divots are so big.
And how much like your letters are the Dear Bill letters in Private Eye?
Oh, nothing at all. They were written by some smart journalists of Private Eye. I mean, in the beginning, they were quite amusing. After a year or two, they got a bit boring, in my opinion. But after all, some people found them amusing. Didn't do me any harm, didn't do Bill any harm.
I rather think I'd lost another golf ball. Ah, that's about it.
Bill Deeds' idiosyncratic style of speaking has provided Private Eye with the line, "Surely some mistake," and has furnished his colleagues with a rich source of Deedsisms.
We're coming to approximately the crunch on this hole.
The characteristic Deedsism is a form of mixed metaphor, which are often more expressive than the original. There'll be things like, you can't make an omelette without frying eggs. I've written this leader telling the Tories to pull their trousers up. Much more expressive than if you just told them to pull their socks up. Or, I smell the finger of the Labour Party in this one.
Bill Deeds comes from a wealthy landowning family in Kent. Politics is in the blood. There's been a Deeds in the Commons over 5 centuries. His family motto is a Latin pun, acta non verba, deeds not words. But a remarkable collection of deeds and words have marked out his life.
Since you mention it, there are rather a lot of ties. I keep meaning to have a go at them and file them out. There never seems to be time. And anyway, I'm very bad at throwing things away. My wife's forever on about jumble, but I mean, we couldn't send that to a jumble, could you, all that? Thing of beauty. So they sort of get there, and there's some pre-war ones down here. And when I look at them, I say, well, what was I doing in that tie? Oh, that was what I was doing. I can't get rid of that. So they stay. And some of them are a bit lonely down here. They get forgotten. Oh, look, that's the old Arabian tie, which I never wear. I don't think it's in good taste to wear old school ties.
Deeds first went to Harrow in 1926, but he was not a happy Harrovian.
There were whole gradations of privileges here, you see. First term, I think you had to keep your blazer buttoned up, and then you were allowed one button, etc. And the swells could wear waistcoats of a certain kind. It wasn't Mr. Major's cup of tea at all, because far from being a classless society here, there was every attempt made to gradate various privileges. And that sort of court is always awkward to live in, particularly if you're one of the new ones.
From his lowly position in the Harrow hierarchy, Deeds was taught that respect for authority was essential for later life. His most painful lessons came from older boys, known as fag masters.
My first fag master had extraordinary. He didn't want very much, except on Sunday afternoon after a walk, he had 6 boiled eggs and toast, 6. And the eggs had to be dead right, and I had to cook them. And it was a bit of a load during the week, wondering whether the eggs would come right. In theory, if you failed on a fagging mission, you got beat. The more boys are put through these disciplines, the easier they find later life, because they actually do touch their forelock to their employer instead of treating the employer like some people do nowadays.
Do you think that was part of what gave you the attitude that you have to employers and to authority that you've had subsequently?
Yes. I mean, Max is really rather like a frightfully senior Harrovian in my first term, yeah.
He wants his 6 eggs boiled properly and will beat you if you don't get it right.
Exactly, you got it in one.
Deeds was never himself to become a frightfully senior Harrovian. He had to leave the school in 1929 when his father suddenly lost all his money in the Great Crash and had to sell the family castle. Bill Deeds' father had inherited Saltwood Castle just after the First World War, but he always found paying for the castle's many servants a struggle. Though he enjoyed life at Saltwood, the young Bill Deeds was always uncomfortably aware of his family's financial problems. And after the crash, he had to break the Deeds tradition. He was sent to work in the Street of Shame.
Fleet Street. Fleet Street in the City of London. Slow-moving traffic masks one of the beating pulses of the world.
The High Tory Morning Post newspaper gave Bill Deeds his first job in Fleet Street as a reporter, but he was only to be paid if his stories actually made it into the paper. He quickly learned to turn his hand to all kinds of subjects, from musical comedy to murder.
Ah, now, that was a fine crime. That was a Brighton trunk crime. That was brilliant, you see, absolutely brilliant. That was a lovely murder. They found a body in a trunk at Charing Cross, and they looked. It had the limbs knocked off, and they were looking for the limbs, and they found another body at Brighton. So then the red light did go up, but it was of its kind. It was a jolly good mystery. You see, murder's to a penny now. In those days, this sort of thing, which wouldn't attract attention now, was immensely exciting, and there was something almost innocent about the enormous human interest in a really good murder.
As a general reporter, Deeds travelled regularly to the most depressed parts of 30s Britain. Each year, the Morning Post organised an appeal to provide Christmas presents to the children of the unemployed. And it was Deeds' job to visit the most deprived areas and write articles about poor children that would tug the strings of his readers' hearts and purses.
I still get letters from grown-ups who were children in the distressed areas and who got their Christmas present. Christmas presents we sent were averaging £0.50, which today is about £3.50, £4. So they weren't cheap. I saw a little waif of a girl on a winter's night pushing her nose through the shop window with her tiny brother in Merthyr Tydfil. And she, you know, sort of great blue rings around her eyes and all the rest of it. And so, I mean, she wrote her own profile. And I put this in the paper and called her Elizabeth. And it was disastrous because readers all wanted to adopt her, educate her, give her a proper home, etc., etc. And then they started sending checks. This is for Elizabeth. This is for her future. This is for her education. Get her to Oxford. I got into terrible trouble. The chief accountant said, we may be had for fraud, you know. I said, well, how are we going to do it? And he said, I think we forget Elizabeth.
But you'd invented the name Elizabeth, had you?
I did, I'm afraid, yes. I'm very sorry. It's one of the things I am ashamed of, sir.
Bill Deeds has been a regular visitor to Africa for the past 60 years. He first made his name as a reporter in Abyssinia in 1935 and had his exploits satirised in a famous comic novel. The Morning Post had chosen Deeds to be its war correspondent as Abyssinia faced invasion from Italy.
Well, I was young and I suppose the premium on the insurance was low. No wife to bellyache about it. No, I had a girlfriend, but she didn't know I was going. She was away at the time. So it was all right, no problems.
Deeds received advice on how to be a war correspondent in Abyssinia from the Morning Post editor, H.A. Gwynne, who'd himself been a reporter in the Boer War.
He said, remember, any dead war correspondent is a useless war correspondent. He didn't need to say that, I knew that. And finally, he said, kit yourself out properly, you are going for the Morning Post, so that sort of spirit.
It was the way Deeds had kitted himself out that first brought him to the attention of a fellow reporter in Abyssinia, Evelyn Waugh. Waugh was to base William Boot, the hero of his comic novel Scoop, on William Deeds, after he'd seen Deeds arriving with his luggage in Addis Ababa.
I had a cedar wood box, a giant box lined with zinc to keep the white ants out, and then 2 uniform boxes, roll of bedding, bed inside it, suitcase, 2 packs, oh, the lot. I suppose it could have occurred to Waugh that there was a certain naivety about my reporting of the first war I'd encountered up to then, and therefore, to that extent, William Boot might represent me. Yes, I think there might be something in that. There is a certain naivety about William. I will plead guilty to naivety. Never done a thing before.
Permission granted. Laku Woods, Corker.
Hey, I'd like the sending off, please.
They have given us permission to go to Laku, and everyone is going. But there is no such place. Shall I go too? Sorry to be a bore. Boot.
What about the actual way that the journalists behaved in Scoop? The way they would make up stories in the book, and they'd always think that someone else was out scooping them.
There's nothing new in this. If you don't tell journalists what's happening, they'll invent it. And what happened, the Abyssinians didn't know this. What happened was, of course, he's sitting in a complete vacuum without any information. and relying on, see, every one of us had a boy, or we called him a spy. And the spy would go downtown and collect some gossip in the marketplace in order to keep his living there. And we all had different spies, and we all got different gossip. And 3 of us teamed up. So we had 3 boys bringing in appalling untruths from the marketplace, which we duly filed to our newspapers.
In Abyssinia, Deeds also did some moonlighting as a newsreel cameraman.
Fox Movie Town paid me $1 a foot for shooting that stuff. It was the sort of last romantic war. It seemed a long way off. It took a fortnight to get there. It had a kind of war flavour. It was a sort of gentleman's war. Well, the Italians were not gentlemen. The Italians used mustard gas. The worst part of the war was when they sprayed these people in mustard gas, and of course the Abyssinian blood is such that mustard gas is absolutely septic. I mean, they were in appalling conditions. And the Ra hospital was something I've never seen since, and I hope never to see again.
Nearly 60 years after he was in Harrar Hospital, Bill Deeds is still reporting from hospitals in African war zones. He was the first journalist to get into southern Angola recently, where the 15-year-long civil war throws up daily atrocities that go largely unreported. In Lubango General Hospital, there's an acute shortage of medicine and drugs, and there's only a single qualified doctor, a Canadian missionary, Dr. Stephen Foster.
She's been here now 2 months. You sewed up her bladder, sewed up her intestine, and God's been gracious and she's survived. And our problem is to send her home, I need a pair of crutches. I've given away all the crutches I was given in Canada, and we've had hundreds of crutches given to us. I just don't have any more. We treated the wounds, and fortunately
How did she get wounded like that?
She was treated by the police assaulted her. They wished to take her for sexual favors, and she said no, ran away, and they cut her down with an AK-47 bullet. As a recruit, as a potential recruit, he ran away, and so he took a bullet through both limbs.
Bill Deeds learns that the Angolan government is using the old British colonial techniques of press-ganging reluctant recruits and crippling those who try to run away.
What sort of day has it been for you as a reporter?
Oh, it's been a good day. We had a good start in that hospital. That surgeon, talking the way he did, those casualties, we got straight into what is really happening here, a sort of anarchy that fills the hospitals with shotgun wounds. And so I always find on these occasions, if you get off to a good start in the morning, it's like selling your strawberry crop before the season really starts. Everything after that is profit.
On his return from Africa in 1936, the journalist by day would turn into a Deb's delight at night.
I remember going to a nightclub in a white tie for somebody's birthday, and we got out about 4 o'clock, it was the start of dawn, we were in white ties, patent leather shoes, and a fellow opened the boot of his car, he was going to give me a lift home, and he said, by God, he said, I got 2 sets of golf clubs in here. Why don't we go and play golf? So we went off to a golf course, which I've never since been able to identify, which was just outside London, and we played golf in patent leather shoes and white ties. And by the time we got round, the groundsmen were starting to arrive, and they were a bit, but I mean, nobody sort of rebuked us or anything. There wasn't much of it. Well, I wouldn't dream of going out in evening clothes now and playing golf at dawn. But in those days, it seemed a lot of fun. You had, in a social way of life, a number of different girlfriends, and you went to dances with them. The dances, in a sense, were rather more disciplined, perhaps I should say. than some of the raves are now. It never got to the point when, you know, the mother would send for you and say, don't you think possibly you might think of making a proposition? Because, well, there is safety in numbers, you see.
Say how I knew my true love was true. I at once replied, something down inside cannot be denied. Now, if you had a love at the time, I mean, it worked like a dream.
At Harrow School, Deeds had been in the combined cadet corps. Ten years after he'd left Harrow, he was reporting the steady build-up to war for the Daily Telegraph, which had taken over the Morning Post. And on the outbreak of the Second World War, he left the paper to become an army officer.
You were much better at the beginning when you didn't know what you were in for. After that, you began to get a bit shaky, particularly if you were shelled for a long time once. But then you got a sort of second wind and became rather cunning. I mean, and after that, it went all right. Mind you, you had to look after soldiers who found battle exhaustion, particularly the young ones. The young ones found it very difficult to keep awake. I was sort of 27, nightclub hardened, and broadly could go a couple of days and a night without sleep. Anything around 19, people just out of school, 18, 19, 20, very difficult to keep them awake.
Deeds was leading a company of riflemen by 1944. His battle honours as a major were to include the Military Cross. The official citation said that he displayed complete disregard of his personal safety as his company tried to take a bridge near Arnhem.
But it was a humpback bridge, so the tanks couldn't lower their guns to give us any covering fire. They fired into the sky. So we were pushed over the bridge, or I pushed people over the bridge, without covering fire. Well, that's asking for trouble. So about halfway across the bridge, brigades, we reported rather heavy casualties. The brigade said, well, you better come back. Well, getting back was worse than going out, because we had to sort of collect the wounded and everybody else and get them off the bridge. So it was a rough day.
Bill Deeds' wartime romance has now lasted 50 years. Hilary Branfoot, the daughter of a Yorkshire industrialist, was in the Women's Land Army when they met. Hilary Deeds now rears Jacob's sheep at their home and uses their wool to make golf trousers for her husband. She has a vivid memory of the day that they first met.
I came home from my one and only try at shearing.
Sheep shearing?
Yeah, sheep shearing. And I came home, that was the day France fell. And I came home and my nephew, who was our page, Bruce Tullow, the runner, said, there's one of the infantry here to tea.
Historically...
I said, how do you know? And he said, his hat's in the hall.
Well, historically, I'm 1 year out, because we actually met in the summer of 41, and France fell in 40. I think you mean it was around the time... I think it was something more to do with Hitler invading Russia. I think France fell a year before we actually met.
Yeah, it fell that day. Because I've only tried...
It had fallen by the time...
fell at 1 o'clock, because when we came in from shearing, they showed me, I was with friends, and I was a bit late because I got stuck with my sheep and it got away from me. And when I'd washed my hands, they showed me into this lovely dining room. and the 1 o'clock news was coming on, and France had fallen, and I stopped dead in the doorway. And everybody walked into me, and we stood in the doorway listening to this awful thing.
Questioning that, what I'm suggesting is that...
It was a year later we met.
If there was a young man about with his hat on the wall, it wasn't mine. That's all I'm saying.
So what did you think, Bill, when you first saw her?
I thought it was rather a practical lady.
A jolly nice house, too.
And a very nice house. Also extremely well. Officers always became very appreciative of hot baths, large meals, and adequate supplies of alcohol, all of which were available at her home. And that, well, it's, in a war, you see, your criteria are rather different from what they might be in peace.
Yes, walk down, get your feet on the table. There were quite a few of them.
But Hilary Branfoot had to wait so long before Bill Deeds made up his mind about proposing that her fancy turned elsewhere.
Actually, I came south on holiday.
I'd be interested to hear your version, whether it's like the Battle of France, which is a year out.
I went on holiday and stayed with my friend in Plymouth and met somebody else, and he was on leave, and he and his mother and his sister and I had a lot of fun, and we got engaged.
So, I'm in no position to contradict her version.
Well, I was engaged, and I know we'd chosen the hymns, and I know where we were going to get married, one thing and another. But it got reversed.
So once she was engaged, that helped make up your mind, did it?
Concentrated his mind wonderfully, which is everything he often says. Yes, it did. Yeah.
I suppose that was it, yes.
I'm taking the bottle away from the baby.
I see.
Deeds starts each day at dawn by hitting 100 golf balls in his practice net at home. While he is swinging away, his wife tends their magpie trap. Magpies are killing off the songbirds in gardens all over England, and they're now legally classed as pests.
Those little sticks fit together and keep this open. And as they jump in, they just jump onto that, and this snaps shut. It's terribly simple, because if you catch anything you don't want, you can just let it go. I'm hoping to catch some grey squirrels in the winter when they get hungry.
My wife is very good at this sort of thing. Well, one of the things that first attracted me to my wife before we were married was she went into the bell pull place of the church, the local church, where pigeon were being a nuisance and disposed of them. She's very good on that, pulling their necks. No problem, no pain. Just, she's better at that sort of thing than I am.
After they married, Deeds went back to the Daily Telegraph and was elected the Tory MP for Ashford, where they lived. But he once offended his party's leader with a paragraph in the Telegraph diary.
I had a thing in Peterborough commenting on the colour of Eden's socks. Said it was a pity he couldn't match his suits more appropriately with his socks. And he was deeply upset. Said we got it in for him. Nonsense. He was always a little bit touchy.
This was Anthony Eden.
But that's the only time I can record saying something about somebody that upset them. Colour of Eden's socks. As you know, he was supposed to be a sartorial model. And so naturally this thing about his socks upset him.
That was the most malicious thing
That's the most malicious
you
thing
ever
I
wrote.
can remember writing. Yes, yes. Think of it. Think of what it would do today and nobody would notice it.
It was a sort of Hello magazine of gossip columns, was it?
Well, if Mr. Major was only criticised for the colour of his socks, what a happy man he'd be.
Well, goodbye, Mr. Wilson. You understand, I'm sure, it wouldn't be right for a Member of Parliament to try to influence a local housing committee. Go and see your local people. I'm sure you'll find them sympathetic. And now
It's
there are
terrible.
many more houses about.
Really is
much
terrible.
better at getting a move.
Worse because I think I wear my D-mob suit, for God's sake. It looks like a D-mob suit.
That's the kind of change
No.
the constituent brings to his MP nowadays.
Can't bear it.
I don't intend to deliver a lecture, but there are one or two historical facts which ought to be common knowledge.
It's what people hold against the Tory party, that sort of, I don't know, that way I talked and the whole... It was like a sort of 20s musical comedy. One looked like one of these people who said, who's for tennis, you know?
So there is nothing surprising in the Conservative government working now for the welfare, benefit and happiness of all the people.
You say that you don't like to look at yourself on television because you might develop mannerisms, but you are well known for one mannerism, your famous S's.
Ah, yes, well, I am a bit of a slurrer there. Yes, that's right, some mistake, you mean. Yes, there was a bit of that there, you see. If any policeman ever stops you in a car, he takes the breathalyzer out almost instantly because he thinks it must be a sign of excess. And occasionally I get sort of abusive letters. Why can't you pronounce words properly, or words to that effect? I'm encouraged by the thought that Winston did it. You see, Winston had a bit of a shush at the end of the thing. And there's nothing you can do about it. But, I mean, do you imagine me trying to iron out that with the neck, open my mouth, it would sound as if it was full of plums.
Bill Deeds has been going to Conservative Party conferences for half a century. Today he's a familiar figure in the conference press room as a reporter and columnist for the Daily Telegraph. But 40 years ago, Deeds was made a junior minister and he attended a memorable Tory conference.
You just wrote. What did you make today?
Historic lunch as well, yeah, but...
In 1955, as a junior housing minister at the conference, Deeds suddenly received a call from the party chairman.
Lord Woolton rang me up at breakfast and said, Mr. Duncan Sands isn't very well, and he's back in London, and you will therefore be replying to the housing debate. I had no paper, no notes, absolutely nothing. This afternoon, said Lord Woolton, or it was this afternoon. It required quick improvisation.
And how did that go?
It was all right. I don't mind admitting to you that my cousin said, who I was staying with, I think the speech may go better if I give you a Purple Heart. It's the only time in my life I've had a Purple Heart.
This was before you spoke to the Tory
party? Yeah, well, I mean, they all looked pygmies when I got on the platform. And where's that damn cat, I felt. And I had a very thin note on housing, but I put it over with such confidence and resolve based Purple Heart. It worked.
Sadly, no film was taken of that conference speech, but a recording does still exist of Bill Deeds in the first ever party political broadcast on television. His role was to interview the Housing Secretary, Harold Macmillan.
And if you ask me about the future, that's my answer.
A very good answer, too.
Well, but have I left out anything?
Well, Minister, there is just this. We're sitting in London, but this is a nationwide thing going on all over Britain. Would you like to indicate that by saying perhaps something about Scotland?
I'm glad you asked that. Because all the figures that I've given you now...
We repeated that about 11 times before we got it right. I'm glad you asked me about that.
Responsible for England and Wales. Scotland comes under the Secretary of State for Scotland. We work together like brothers. And indeed we might well do so, for we are brothers-in-law.
By 1962, Deeds was opening congratulatory telegrams after Macmillan had suddenly brought him into the cabinet. His task was to use his propaganda skills to sell the Tories to an increasingly disillusioned electorate.
The new minister responsible for information, William Deeds, replied to the debate.
Now, sometimes a minister, to illustrate the problem, comes to me and says, I have a plan, and it's quite a good one. It's going to benefit quite a few million people. How do we put it over? And I have a word with the kingpins of communications. Frankly, they say, we're always very frank, frankly, they say, our people are not interested. Our people are not much interested. But if the same minister drops a clanger, our people come galloping into my office like a thundering herd, Everyone wants him. On the air, on the screen, on the front page. That's the price of a free press, and it's worth every penny of it.
Promising young man, promising man there, yes, right. pity about the government.
The War Minister, John Profumo, vehemently denied any links with Christine Keeler when the Profumo scandal first broke on a government already in deep political trouble. But when the allegations were repeated in the Commons in the small hours of the morning, Bill Deeds and 4 other ministers had the task of trying to get the truth from Jack Profumo.
It was a silly night all round. I mean, Jack had gone to bed with a sleeping draught, but he had a press piled outside his house, so why not? And he was woken up at 2 in the morning, dragged along there, about 6 people and his own lawyer and so on, sat in the chief whip's room. I'd gone back to bed. I was summoned at 2 in the morning to go back to this folly, and then he was talked at. I don't know what anyone expected to happen, quite. I mean, in a sense, the fault was on our side, really, more almost than on his. So, under this sort of duress, he produced a statement, and I think Peter Rawlinson and I went down to I was the only minister with a typewriter. I kept it for old time's sake. So I was the only person who could type the thing out. I don't think it is very sensible to have somebody who has been under a heavy sleeping draught to come along and find a room full of 6, 7 people and be asked, when did you last see your father? That sort of question, you see.
Well, he was actually asked if he had an affair with Christine Keeler.
Yes, that's right. Well, all right, and he didn't give the right answer. If you say to somebody at that hour of the night in those bizarre circumstances, and I wish to stress bizarre circumstances, yes or no, and they say no, what do? We don't believe a word of it, so you better say this. What do you say to them? What do you say? Or, we'd like to check this from other sources. At 3 in the morning? It certainly couldn't have been made harder for him to express the truth than this midnight gathering. I mean, I often thought of myself confronted with this kind of gang. What would I have said? I'm never quite sure what I would have said. I'm never sure what I would have said. And that's really the bottom line in this one.
I mean, but do you yourself feel that you should have realised that he wasn't telling you the truth?
No.
The Profumo affair helped bring down the Tory government. And after 2 years as its propaganda minister, Deeds went back to the Daily Telegraph. In 1975, he was made editor, and among his contacts was a direct line to the husband of the newly elected Tory party leader.
It's better.
No, nowhere near the green, I'm afraid. More turf flying.
The 40-year friendship between Dennis Thatcher and Bill Deeds was strengthened by regular golfing holidays together.
Now,
I shouldn't have done that.
That, I think, is rather misfortunate.
Straight down the middle all the time, you know. Get him alongside the green and he's down in 2. Oh, he's a wonderful golfer.
Can't get him better than that, Bill.
That's not bad, is it?
Portugal, Spain, south of France, north of France, you name it, we've been together playing.
Well, they do that in Florida, and very much in Japan. You know, the little caddy girls have got these spades and wet
I've never
sand.
done it. You've done it in Japan, haven't
Yeah.
you? I've never done it.
Yeah.
With a lady caddy?
Yes, highly trained, quite incredible, very highly trained.
I think I shall always find the next task to do. Always.
Mrs. Thatcher always saw Bill Deeds as one of us, someone she could rely on during his 11 years as editor at the Telegraph.
Because I think it's a 15-minute speech, which is really rather short for any politician.
And you made a speech to 2,000 people yesterday, sometime.
Yes, it was really fun. And
I was saying to Dennis, I do think that Monday night was super. Absolutely lovely party.
Monday
That
night, yes,
really
it
was.
is.
Spencer House.
Wasn't it?
You remember it?
Yes, I do. Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Nobody's quite sure what happens in the towns. I've been through this with Norman before, I may say, because I told him that it was easier to detect a Tory from his attitude on magpies than his attitude on Europe. Isn't that right?
But I suspect that attitudes may be similarly divided on magpies.
We did follow Mrs. Thatcher's policies. We thought they were right. But we didn't follow them because she'd turned her blue eyes onto us.
The Telegraph was a bastion of Thatcherism under Deeds, though he claims the relationship between journalists and politicians should be abrasive.
There wasn't any difference on the newspaper about the Thatcher approach being what the country most needed at the time, and particularly things like trade union legislation. We were living with print unions who were only giving us a paper by default, actually.
As editor of the Telegraph, Deeds faced a range of problems. The paper was still being printed on obsolete machinery, and though it was the best-selling of the broadsheets, the Telegraph had a lethal mix of weak management, grasping unions, insufficient capital, and an ageing readership. Deeds was convinced his primary loyalty lay to the Telegraph's proprietor, Lord Hartwell, who was not a great believer in change.
It wasn't a place to be original and come in with all sorts of bright ideas. I longed to get a strip cartoon in the paper. I had America Trawl for one, but every time Lord Hartwell said he was worried about taste. And so the only serious, there wasn't a disagreement, but there was always a coolness between us about the strip cartoon. I bring it up about every 6 months. I have some more strip cartoons for your inspection. Agonized face. But it wasn't a place to start being bright and say, you know, why don't we do this? In any case, we were restricted by what the printers were allowing us to do. You know, it wasn't a place to suddenly get... Today, you could alter the makeup of a paper overnight. Gracious me, altering one sort of type here took weeks of negotiation. Even then you had trouble. Money, money.
By the end of '85, the Daily Tory Graph was facing bankruptcy. The paper that liked to lecture the country on the virtues of strong management had an editor who ran the loosest of ships.
Well, I don't really think, to be honest, that he's one of nature's editors. I mean, for me, it was perfect. For the Daily Telegraph, I don't think it was so perfect because he wouldn't really take command of the whole thing.
I suppose one ought to have been more... Well, you'd have to be ruthless. You'd have to be ruthless. You'd have to say to management or Hartwell, either we do this or I go. You know, that sort, which isn't my sort of language. I don't believe that you should do that kind of thing. And so, in a sense, we were stuck in this mess.
Deeds had to step out of the mess and resign as editor in 1986 when Conrad Black acquired the Telegraph. It seemed his career was over after 55 years in Fleet Street. But within weeks, Deeds was back at the top table under his successor, Max Hastings.
What are we going to do? Anybody got any brilliant ideas at the moment? I'm very reluctant to do leaders about soccer fans because I just feel you just end up saying all the usual bromides, and apart from saying how awful, I can't think it actually brings anything to the party.
I suppose to take away the passport would be a great infringement of civil liberty.
Now aged 80, Deeds still works every day at the Telegraph, both as a leader writer and a columnist. He has an unerring knack for identifying the daily concerns of his readers.
Our canary died this week. It's very odd, because a canary is a very small animal and not much of a pet to me. But I came down to have my early morning tea and I looked at the dead canary at the bottom of his cage. However small the household pet is, it's odd how finding something dead. I imagine Mr. Livingston, when he finds one of his newts dead, gets the same sort of quick pang. It's odd, isn't it, really? I'm very strict about this because I don't believe that the animals should be endowed with the same qualities as human beings. You don't mourn animals as you would human beings. But I'm not sure whether I shall be able to work anything out of this. Of course, it would be very popular with the Daily Telegraph readers because most of them have canaries or battery cars. And if one could enlarge on a sense of loss, which even a tiny thing gives you, that would go down all right. Well, this is pretty good for Thursday because very often I wake up on Friday mornings without an idea in my head.
I may be wrong, but I think Bill has had a liberated phase in the last 8 years that I hope I'm right in thinking he's really enjoyed, when he hasn't had the responsibility, but he's able to travel the world, and God does he travel, doing all kinds of things and seeing all kinds of things and going back to what he loves best, which is being a reporter.
Deeds delights in travelling to report from third world countries. The more inaccessible, the better. Recent visits have taken him to southern Angola and northern Vietnam. He does fundraising work for the international relief agency CARE, and this enabled him to get into Angola, which was refusing journalists permission to enter.
Well, I'm fond of CARE, and CARE helped me to get places where reporters aren't deeply welcome. That's the real reason. And they've enabled me to see more of Africa where I wouldn't be allowed in. Great is the name of the Daily Telegraph, but they're not welcome everywhere.
At the military airport in southern Angola, the latest casualties of the 15-year-long civil war were unloaded.
Foram feitos pela UNITA na altura da sua retirada, a população que não queria sair com eles e eles começaram a atirar contra a população.
Where were these people wounded?
They were wounded in a part of the country that no journalists have been able to reach for the past year. Deeds was witnessing at first hand the effects of what he calls the ugliest war he's seen in Africa in 60 years of reporting from there.
The sight of those wounded coming off the plane reminded you what a cruel war this is. I mean, those women had been hit 2 days, 3 days ago. They had terrible wounds. Nothing had been done with them. They weren't even bandaged. They came down with rags around the wounds. And behind them, I guess there are a lot more people in that condition, including a lot of children. I'm never pleased to see these things, but I came to see what this war was like, and this afternoon I've had a reminder of what it is like.
Journalism is absolutely in his blood. He loves whatever the new thing is. And he's just witnessed an unbelievable amount of the 20th century, and he wants to go on witnessing it till the end.
I'm not interested in what happened yesterday. You can't have it again. What happens tomorrow is what matters. And if you can guess right, or guess partly right, what's going to happen tomorrow, where the story is going to be, enormous satisfaction.
It keeps you young?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Oh, absolutely. I like a warm climate, too.
When the lovely flame dies, smoke gets in your eyes.